Hi, and welcome to the Northern Myths podcast, where we take a look at the myths and legends of Northern Europe from an archetypal perspective. I'm Dan Larrabee.
And I'm Luke DeWolf.
This is episode 7 for us, as we continue our journey through the Poetic Edda, and we're going to be looking at the Grimnismal today, the tale of Odin and Frigg betting each other on who can screw up their kids more. How you doing, Luke?
I'm good, Dan. How are you?
Oh, not too bad.
It's a good summary of this particular story.
I think so.
Maybe just a little bit of information about it. It does come from the Codex Regius, which is the manuscript where most of the Poetic Edda is from, but it's also found in another manuscript, which I won't bother going through the exact name. You can actually find the manuscript in the book here, though, that we're reading, the Poetic Edda, translated by Jackson Crawford.
Our trusty Poetic Edda.
Absolutely. You can find a link below on to the Amazon link below in the description here on both YouTube and the podcast notes.
As well as his YouTube channel, which he goes over Old Norse, the language and the history of it, and it's fantastic. It's a great resource.
Absolutely. Couldn't recommend it highly enough. Definitely check it out. Sounds
good. And just a bit more about the Grimnismal before we dive in. It was written in the 10th century, with that particularly the poetic part of it. There's a prose prologue and epilogue, and those are dated to about the 12th or 13th century. As well, it is in the form of a ballad or song, and you can tell that because of the Hlidskjalf meter. And I totally read that off of Wikipedia, but I thought it was pretty cool, so I decided to mention it here.
That's a good detail, and it makes sense too. Actually, the content of the poem, as we'll see, it's very lore heavy, which is really it's just Odin reciting a whole bunch of lore, and I think that would work well in a sort of a ballad or a song, and it's a common theme too. Our episode number 5 of Grimnismal was sort of similar here, where it was in the context of a different story, but it really just ended up being Odin reciting a fair bit of lore here, and so we're going to see that in today's episode as well.
And that seems to be a common theme with Odin, where he goes out and about and then just sort of spills his guts on how the universe is made and put together.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the things he enjoys doing based on these stories. So.
For sure. All right, shall we dive into it then?
Let's do it.
Okay. Just get the page here, and we are good to go. So it's actually going to start off with prose. So I'm going to read a paragraph, and then we'll talk about it and sort of go from there. So the Grimnismal, concerning the sons of King Hrothung. King Hrothung had 2 sons. One was named Agnar, and the other Geirroth. Agnar was 10 years old, and Geirroth was 8. The 2 of them rowed out in a boat with their fishing tackle and hoped to catch some small fish. But the wind drove them far out into the sea. In the dark night they wrecked and went up onto the land, where they met a poor farmer, and they stayed there with him over the winter. The farmer's old wife fostered Agnar, but the farmer fostered Geirroth and tutored him. Early in the spring the man gave them a boat, and when he and his wife followed them down to the shore, the man spoke to Geirroth in secrecy.
Okay, quite a few things here right off the bat. So the idea of these boys going out to sea, if you guys have been paying attention to some of the themes here, going out to sea or being related to the sea or the water, that definitely is a representation of chaos or the unknown. And in this case, I think that's exactly right. They've gone from their familiar place, their father's hall, and now something bad is happening to them on the sea, on the ocean. It's something where bad things can happen just in general. Ships or whatever just disappearing and never being seen again. And in this case, that's essentially what's happened here. They shipwreck, but they're okay. So that's a good thing here. And then these 2 boys get raised for a while by an old farmer and his wife, who we might be some familiar characters.
For sure. No spoilers yet. Yes, I really liked what you said about the two boys going off into the unknown, and they're kind of at that age where they're exploring, right? 8 and 10, and they're brothers, so there's security between them, and going off, and it's something that's right within their capability. Going fishing, it's very normal. It's not, they weren't going to fight the Midgard serpent like Thor. They were just going to go, fishing and catch some fish and bring it home, show their dad, kind of thing, like super normal boy stuff.
Absolutely. And then what was interesting to me about the farmer and his wife here, I think there's something to do with a competing masculine and feminine influence here. Something like, different styles of nurturing or upbringing, and kind of seeing how that's going to play out. It's interesting to me that the wife fosters the older boy, and to me that's I think there would be something to do with the older boy being maybe the more prestigious one, to be able to grow and nurture. Maybe not, maybe I'm off base here, but I think there's something to that, and maybe that implies that she actually got first pick of the two boys, the one she wanted to foster and grow, and then the farmer gets the younger brother. So that's kind of interesting. But yeah, I think the bottom line here is it's something like two different styles of upbringing.
Definitely. And we'll definitely get into that more as we go on. And before we go on, because I think the next paragraph is coming up pretty shortly, I wanted to mention the names, because I'm always interested in what they mean. And Agnar, it kind of has this dual meaning where one interpretation of it could be blade warrior, which is actually kind of cool name, but also that the word terror is in there as well. So it kind of like a terrifying blade warrior. So it's a very strong name, and you can see that a king would name their son, this name that could very easily belong to a champion warrior. And then Geirroth, his name is Spearlove or Spear Lover. And again, it's a very militaristic, my son's going to be a warrior. And I think we'll see something kind of ironic with that name later on in the story, maybe even in the next episode. So, pay attention for that.
Yeah, we're not doing this whole poem in one episode. It's just a bit too dense and too long. So this one is like most of our others, is going to be more than one episode.
Sure. Yeah, we tried the one episode thing before, and that was just a bit too much for us.
I think that was our longest episode yet.
Yeah.
We could have easily split that into two. So we've learned our lesson. Don't bite off more than you can chew. That's got to be in the Hobmal somewhere.
Oh, definitely. All right, so I'll move on to the next two paragraphs. The boys departed, and the wind was favorable. They came to their father's harbor, and then Geirroth, who stood foremost in the boat, sprang up. I don't know why my eyes jumped. Okay. They came to their father's harbor, and then Geirroth, who stood foremost in the boat, sprang up on land and shoved the boat back out to sea and said, "Go wherever the trolls take you." The boat drifted far out to sea with Agnar, but Geirroth went inland to his father's hall. He was received well, but he learned that his father had died, so Geirroth was taken as king, and he became a famous man.
Yeah, so a few things there. First of all, go wherever the trolls take you. Isn't that just something funny you would say there? Good line. So again here, just a reminder that Geirroth here is the younger son, so he wouldn't have been king in general. And then going back to the previous stanza just a little bit here, at the very end there, it's that the man, the farmer, spoke to Geirroth in secrecy. So I think it's implied here that Geirroth was encouraged, or I think instructed is too strong, but encouraged to, go and compete and to take his destiny into his own hands, and maybe to, in the style of the hostile brothers, to maybe take care of his older brother. And isn't that, Cain and Abel, the traditional hostile brother story? If I'm getting this right, Cain is the younger brother, or am I flipping that?
No, I think you're right.
Right. So that's an interesting theme, right? Younger brother takes out their older brother. Interesting. But then I guess it's something like he usurps his brother and ends up becoming king. So I think this just shows something to do with, if we're going back to the previous paragraph, I think I said stanza earlier. Maybe this is just part of that, the more masculine or male way of doing things, which is just to be competitive and to, well, I suppose, take out your own brother. We don't really go into more of the malicious, resentful reasonings that are attached to other hostile brothers stories here. It's very quick, but that could be at play here as well.
And actually, I think it would be at play just because here's a shortcut for the younger brother so that he doesn't have to make all the right sacrifices for the future to get what he wants. Here's a very quick and dirty sacrifice, and it is a big one. I mean, it's his brother, but he makes this particular sacrifice, and lo and behold, he becomes king. So it seems like a pretty good deal, but as we always say, you don't get away with anything, so something's going to happen.
Exactly. Good stuff.
Shall we move on with the story?
Yeah.
Back to the book. Odin and Frigg sat in Hlidskjalf and looked out over all the worlds. Odin said, "Look how your foster son Agnar sits and fathers children on a troll woman in a cave, while my foster son Geirroth is king and rules the land."
All right, so I guess we're figuring something out. The farmer and his wife was Odin and Frigg, and this is something that happens elsewhere in the lore, where someone will be nominally in some kind of disguise and they meddle with the affairs of us mortal humans and things like that. And so this is not uncommon. But so it's Odin and Frigg. Odin is Geirroth's foster father, I suppose, is the terminology he's using, and Frigg is the foster mother to Agnar. And I guess their bet played out in a certain way. Odin was deceptive with Geirroth, speaking to him in secret and probably telling him this is something that you could do to kind of get ahead, which is also interesting here, that they sort of were as a husband-wife team. They're competing with each other. It's an interesting dynamic. But then we get into Hlidskjalf, this other dynamic here, this other detail. So this is a high vantage point, and it's where Odin would sit, and obviously other gods. In another poem, for example, Grimnismal, Freyr, it gets to sit on Hlidskjalf, so it's not exclusive to Odin, but it's a high place where you can sit and see the entire world, essentially. And to me, that evokes something like the top of the pyramid, the eye on the top of the pyramid, which is imagery throughout our culture these days. It's on the dollar bill in the States and things like that. So it's an important place. I think we'll talk more about it, but I guess this is one of the first places that we really see that.
For sure. And I'll just mention too, so with Hlidskjalf, I'm not going to be able to say it right the whole time through. So it's kind of one of Odin's thrones, and when Freyr sits there, he's not supposed to, because he's not worthy of it yet. Frigg, however, is allowed to. She is worthy of it, so that they share it. And I just wanted to point out that equality there, that they're husband and wife, and we've said this before, but they're very well matched. There isn't. Actually, I would probably say Frigg actually has the upper hand over Odin, and we'll see some of that here. So, I'll continue.
If you're going to continue in the poem, just one more detail here. Mm-hmm. I think it was interesting that Agnar fathers children on a troll woman. Again, another funny turn of phrase here, but this I think points to, again, something more about that maternal influence, because Frigg is not necessarily every aspect of femininity. She's certainly more of like a mother figure or something more like nurturing, something like that.
For sure.
And I think here, the implications here, he's fathering children. I mean, how, like, that's fun. That's still a good thing. He's still growing a family, building a family. And a troll woman, I mean, for them, we've already touched on how the giants or the trolls or whatnot were just a shorthand for, not just, in some cases, a shorthand for the other tribes, people outside the tribe. And so, he's out fathering children. He's still building himself a family. That's still a success in a lot of ways. He didn't just go off and die. He still built a life. And this actually, I think, parallels the story of Ishmael in the Bible, where the rejected firstborn son of Abraham goes off and fathers his own tribe, which is still rather influential in the world today. So mirrors that story a little bit, I think.
For sure. And actually, if we're going to get into it, I was going to save it for another paragraph, but we can touch on it a bit. I guess two things. I'll start with the biblical one, because you mentioned it. I see a bit of the book of Job in here, where you have two deities sort of using humans as their pawns to kind of prove a point. With Odin and Frigg, it's kind of fun for them, I think, to see who can do the best with their foster kids. And very similar to Job, where God and the devil are trying to figure out who can influence him more, and the devil's trying to make Job into Cain, really, and God's saying, "Oh no, he's not going to do that." And it reminds me that the ancient peoples, they may have believed that there was deities existed and lived in certain places, but there's also an idea that they interacted directly within us. So when someone was filled with anger, they were filled with, the influence of the anger god. And so we're kind of seeing that here, where, we're thinking that Odin and Frigg are meddling, but really, and I don't want to reduce it just to psychological factors at all, but we're seeing how Frigg and Odin would manifest themselves in these two kids, sort of in their divine wager. And then sort of building on that, and I don't know if it's a perfect match with it, but when I was reading the Grimnismal, it reminded me of Jung's theory of the anima and animus, and the anima being the feminine within the psyche of the man, and the animus being the masculine within the psyche of the woman. And again, it's not necessarily a gendered thing. It's more of an archetypal thing, where there are, in general, certain behaviors that the masculine symbolizes and certain behaviors that the feminine symbolizes. So just to make sure that we're not getting bogged down in the gendered part of it. Yeah. And well, I'll talk a little bit more about the anima and animus later on.
I was going to say that there's a good spot
for sure
that's coming up. So.
Yeah.
No, I like that though about this is sort of the way that gods that are associated with different characteristics might manifest themselves basically through people experiencing certain things a certain way. And I mean, yeah, I don't want to chalk this all up to only psychological things. There are a lot more factors to how religion
for sure
developed, but that's really cool. I like that idea. I didn't even think of that. So
I actually just thought of it right now. So there we go.
Love it. Love when we do that.
All right. So I think we'll move on. Okay. So they've just been comparing their foster kids. Frigg said, "But Geirroth is so stingy with food that he starves his guests if he thinks there are too many." Odin said that this was a tremendous lie, and so he and Frigg made a wager about it. Then Frigg sent her servant Fulla to Geirroth, and had Fulla warn him that a sorcerer had come to the land, but that the sorcerer could be recognized by the fact that even the fiercest dog would not attack him.
This is a really, really interesting couple of paragraphs here. First of all, accusing Geirroth of being inhospitable, essentially here. I mean, if we've learned anything about the last few episodes here, the Havamal, even Vafthrudnismal, that is a huge insult.
That's fighting words.
Absolutely. And this is really funny. And I've really enjoyed this over the last couple of episodes, the interplay between Odin and Frigg. Like, I just cannot help but think this is just a couple in love that enjoy the interplay between each other, competing with each other and going at each other in the best way possible. I had not dug into this stuff nearly as well as I had and really thought through what it implies, but I just think these guys are like the best couple that we really get to see a lot of in the Poetic Edda in Norse mythology in general, I think.
I agree. They both seem to enjoy a lot of the same things, and they're playing a game together, which is nice. I mean, they're using, kids, but that's neither here nor there.
Relationship goals either way, though, I think.
Either way, yeah.
Yeah, so this is a good one. And then this also, I think, shows that Frigg is not sort of this exactly perfect. That's not the right word. She is just as deceptive as Odin, capable of the sort of same deceptive thing. So it's not like she is only the positive virtues or something like that. She's not any better, but I mean that in a good way. I mean that in the sense of they are right on the same level with each other, and they're willing to do the same things to kind of get an advantage over one another. And I think that's a good thing. I think that shows that Frigg is a complete character and shows the capability of a feminine figure to be this well-rounded figure.
Definitely. And I think the fact that we have Frigg sending out a servant to really to trick Odin and stack the deck against him. Odin, the god of wisdom and knowing things, and his wife's just easily tricking him. I love that. And you're absolutely right about they're both willing to be deceptive and sort of stacked against the deck against each other, because we had Odin earlier, talking to Geirroth in secret, and now she's like, well, I'm gonna make things really hard for you when you go there, and we'll see how that works out for him.
Yeah, and I mean, this really is not to say this is the ideal way to be in a relationship, but first of all, I think the implication here is that it's working for them, because I don't believe they're attacking each other's character or anything like that, which would be very bad if they were lying and deceitful in a way that was actually going to be harmful to each other. That'd be a bad thing. But they're playing games with each other, and realistically, like I think that's just them having a bit of fun, and that's a good thing for you got to be able to just have fun with each other.
Exactly. What do you do when you're gods and you're married and you're looking for some fun?
You go screw up some kids.
Yeah, you go screw up some kids and then try and screw each other up a little bit on when they're trying to fix it. Yeah, no, it's a game I would play. Absolutely, if I had that capability. Yeah, for sure. All right, to the next paragraph. It was in fact an idle rumor that Geirroth was miserly with his food. All the same, he ordered any man who would not be attacked by any dog to be apprehended. Odin came wearing a blue cape and called himself Shadowed Face, or Grimnir, as the story is known by. But he said nothing more of himself even when asked. So the king had him tortured in an effort to extract more information from him, and had him placed between two burning fires where he sat for 8 nights.
So first of all, Geirroth is not inhospitable. So first of all that just goes to show he did have the right kind of upbringing, which I think that's what actually that was implying. Your kid isn't hospitable. Like, that's a major failing if that were to happen. So that wasn't the case, and goes to show Frigg was in fact lying a little bit there. But still, he goes and essentially sees that Odin is here, matching the description that Frigg laid out and has him tortured. And I think this means a couple of things to me. First, Odin refuses to say more about himself. He could have just revealed himself and probably avoided a lot of bother, that's for sure, but he doesn't. And I don't know if that's necessarily something like prideful. Yeah, maybe that's more what I was going for. Like he's got too much pride to kind of reveal himself and get him out of a jam. He's just going to let the thing play out. There's something there. I can't put my finger on it, but
well, I'm sure if Odin had just revealed himself and said, "I am Odin. Hey, Geirroth, I hear you're inhospitable. Be hospitable," Frigg would be like, "Hey, that's cheating. That's not fair." So I think that's kind of what it is that he's trying to stay in the game.
Yeah, and maybe if we take it to another level here, maybe he's also trying to really see his character for himself. Yeah, something to that effect. And then the idea that he is placed between two burning fires, so that is really interesting. This echoes the sort of ordeal that we saw in the Voluspa, the story of what was her name? Now I'm blanking.
I can remember the translation was like the golden one.
Yeah. Back in our first episode, definitely. Or was this our second one by then? I think it was the first episode.
Yes, because we had talked about the war between the Aesir and Vanir.
Yeah,
and this was a big part of that.
Exactly, but it's the same sort of ordeal. She was burned 3 times over, 3 nights over, something like that. And this is sort of similar, placed between burning fires. And this is actually reminiscent of ways that Lappi shamans would, or Laplander shamans would get themselves into the state of being able to get revealed knowledge. And the Sami, that's the right term. Lappi is less politically correct. The Sami were, they come up a lot because they were essentially the northern neighbors to the Norse. And, they were the ones who were willing to go out and live in like the really bad areas and just hang out with their reindeer and stuff like that. But they had some really interesting rituals and things like that really have continued on to today. They were isolated for a long, long time, and their traditions kept up, definitely to the point of where they were able to be studied by anthropologists and things like that. So it's interesting that this is sort of reminiscent of that somewhat, just the use of fire in particular. So,
well, it is interesting. It's a very sort of shamanistic initiation, and what's interesting because you said that. The Sami would use this and shamans sort of in general, they used an ordeal to be able to reveal sort of divine knowledge. And that's sort of what we're going to see here is that Odin will start spouting out divine knowledge. And it's a very interesting setup for it, that they have Odin going through this and then talking about how the universe was made.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't think it's right to imply that Odin didn't know these things before the ordeal, but they sort of causally do, which is
for sure.
Yeah, that's interesting enough on its own. It implies some kind of sacrifice to be able to gain this knowledge, which we've already seen is a common enough theme. But I don't think any of what we're going to talk about is something that would have been unknown to Odin at the time. But it's interesting that it's that revealed knowledge.
I fully agree. I almost get the feeling that the knowledge is definitely for Geirroth's son, who we're about to meet. And so I almost think there is some sort of interplay with initiation and shamanism with Agnar because he's about to get this revealed knowledge. But
yeah, since you're already mentioning it, why don't we just
go?
Yep.
So the next paragraph. King Geirroth had a 10-year-old son named Agnar, after the king's brother. Agnar went to this shadow face, or hooded one, I like that one, and gave him a full horn to drink and said he thought his father was behaving poorly to torture a man without cause. Shadowed Face drank, and by then the fire had grown so large that it had begun to burn his cloak. Then Shadowed Face said, I should probably just keep going.
Yeah,
here.
why not?
You're hot fire, and much too big. Get away from me, flames. My coat is getting burned, even though I'm holding it up. My clothing is on fire. I've sat between the fires here for 8 nights, and no one offered or gave me food, except Agnar alone. Now Agnar will be the sole ruler of the land of the Goths. Hail, Agnar. It's the chief of the gods who's wishing you well. You will never be repaid so well for one drink, no matter how long you live.
All right, a lot to unpack on this one. So I'll start beginning here. So the king Geirroth has a son, Agnar, who is now the same age as Agnar was at the beginning of the story here, the king's brother. So I believe the implication here is that this is a spiritual reincarnation of his brother Agnar in his son. So there's something to the usage of a name and the power of a name, and there was an idea that they could be reincarnated through a name. People could be reincarnated through a name, and that's sort of related to the idea of luck as well. I think it's the shared luck of a family passed on through generations. That's talked about more in the sagas, I believe, but it's just one of those concepts here that I think is being referenced. But the implication here is that the son is inheriting the influence of Frigg, and he is the one who chooses ultimately to be hospitable towards Odin and offer him a drink. And to me, that says something like this: the integration of the masculine and feminine influences into a proper way of being, something like that.
I couldn't agree more, because when I was looking at the anima for both Agnar and Geirroth, so I was reading, I'll show you this book, Man and His Symbols by Carl Jung. Great book, and whenever I read it, I have weird Jungian dreams, so I highly recommend it. The sort of symptoms, so the anima is the feminine within the psyche of a man, and there are sort of symptoms of when it's been fully integrated into the man, and symptoms of when it hasn't been integrated. And how well it's integrated into a man is usually determined by the relationship with the mother. And to give you an idea of how important it is for men to integrate the anima and for women to integrate the animus, Jung calls the integrating the shadow the apprentice work, or the apprentice piece, but integrating the anima or animus the masterpiece. So this is this is kind of the goal of how to become a fully functional, healthy adult man or woman. But I think what we see here is that Agnar, I'll call him Agnar the First, and Geirroth have not integrated the anima properly, because one of the symptoms of not properly integrating it is a tendency to indulge too much in women. And so Jung talks specifically about pornographic images, and there was a great term he had. It was old-fashioned, but basically striptease. Maybe peep show. That might have been what he said. And I think with Agnar, we see that is that his life is devoted to being on top of the troll woman. And, that's not a bad life, really. It's just not a full one. And then with Geirroth, we see that he's got a little more influence from Odin, so he's going after things a bit more, which is typically a very masculine trait. But he's very paranoid and insecure and unsure of himself. And that is also sort of the hallmark of not properly integrating the anima. So we're really seeing two different sides of what happens when you don't integrate the anima. There are other symptoms, but these are some of the main ones that Jung mentions. And I think with Agnar, the younger one, we are seeing that integration where he has Geirroth, his father, who was able to instill sort of the masculine virtues, because Agnar is approaching this stranger who's between, two fires. That's kind of weird. Like that, and he's 10 years old. Like that's a brave thing to do. He's offering a drink, so that he's welcoming this symbol of chaos that's come into his life. He's welcoming it and showing the proper hospitality. And we've talked about this a little bit in Havamal, that a lot of the hospitality can be abstracted to how to properly greet chaos into your life, that you welcome it as a friend, so that one, it doesn't catch you off guard, and two, it's always better to welcome it in than to hate it and deal with it. So I think that's sort of what we're seeing here, is that this interplay between needing both the masculine and feminine side of your personality and psyche to be able to look at chaos and welcome it as a friend.
Isn't it just mind-blowing that something like that is so well articulated here, when we're just really, really figuring it out in the 1800s, 1900s, and look at that. I mean, it's not like it's obvious exactly what this is saying, but it almost is, once you just peel it back and understand that this is something that really is meaningful psychologically, and it's mind-blowing to me. That is a great idea there. Just that this is showing the integration of these two sides of your personality.
It's really neat. Yeah, I don't really know what to add, because it's just so... I had worried at first when I was thinking about this that I was reading too much into it, but it just all fits so well that...
Absolutely. No, I think it's perfect. Well, first of all, we both went to the same place. Sure. I trusted that you've read a little more Jung than I have, and I trusted that was probably where you were going. But we did get to the same place with it, and
for sure.
And it's like, well, I mean, just to go back a little bit further, it's something like, what is the significance of the father and the mother sort of picking one over the other? And I mean, I think that has to come down to, that's the influence that's going to make it into their lives in general. And then really how that plays out. And it just works out that neither one really gets what they need. It implies that you need both a strong father and a strong mother, both their influence, to really come out okay. Well, first of all, crime statistics. I mean, it's huge. The level of crime statistics when in a particular area, regardless of race or origin, it goes way up. Crime statistics go way up when there's a higher rate of single parents.
Definitely.
Fathers or mothers, I think, but it's mostly single mothers, and so absence of the father. But then the absence of a good mother figure, I mean, that's also something that can really screw a guy up.
Or definitely.
Or a girl, person, whoever. So,
yeah, I remember, here we go with the first Jordan Peterson reference. I remember in one of his lectures, he was saying that, kids can recover from fatherlessness. They can recover, but if something goes wrong with the mother, that's a hard one. And as a clinical psychologist, he was saying, that's a really he doesn't know if you can come back all the way from that. So, it is important that there is this interplay between, fatherhood and motherhood to form a child that's going to be a functioning adult. I mean, I remember hearing, a stat particularly about fatherlessness, that not everyone without a father goes to jail, but everyone in jail is without a father, kind of thing. It's not quite that black and white, but that's pretty close to how it goes. And that was it is the biggest determining factor of whether or not someone has the likelihood of going to jail. It's a big deal. Parents are important.
Exactly. And I mean, a big concept here to understand is that stories like this are how we humans figured the world out. The use of ritual, religious ritual, originally the idea is that it's the way we enacted the things that we were starting to make sense of, and you had to do it. You had to act it out. You had to give up part of this year's harvest in order to ensure that there's a good next one, because it means you have to work even harder for the rest of your for what's remaining afterwards, right? And it cycles back into a mindset of this is how we're going to live in the world, and then it went into ritual drama, which is enacting out the things that are some sort of an ideal, and then maybe a story like this is really just a way of explaining to yourself. That's important, actually. It's not just explaining to other people, but articulating within yourself these important ideas, such as parenthood, such as you need to have a mother and a father. You need to have two people that are going to go it together, and that's what is most likely to produce a good functioning child.
For sure.
It's fascinating that that's kind of how that happened, and that's how a story like this would have emerged. And it's just fantastic to me that this is something that mirrors some of the best minds that have ever come across their most brilliant ideas. It's all sitting here in some of these stories. I mean, I think that's really partially at least part of the thesis of Dr. Peterson's work in general, is just that you can find so much in these stories.
Oh, definitely. Jung too. I mean, that was his kind of his thesis, that these stories are just filled with meaning.
Absolutely.
That's really why we're doing this too, is that they're filled with meaning, and we want to figure out what that meaning is, or at least scratch the surface.
Yeah. It feels sometimes that there's just so much to learn here, and I mean, already, like, geez, like mind blown already a couple of times today. So,
shall we continue on with the?
Yeah, I think the last point, especially getting into we've gone through the first 3 stanzas already here now. So just maybe one last point about it is that Agnar gives Odin, he doesn't know this yet, but he gives Odin a drink, and that's actually a really common way that the Norse people sacrificed. Was you would take an alcoholic beverage of some kind, and essentially you're giving it to a god. You pour it on the ground or whatever, and that is for some particular god. And I mean, that is exactly what happened here, and he gets a fantastic reward out of it. So maybe it's also nailing down the point of, you've got to make symbolic sacrifices like this, but what you receive in return is this deep knowledge that Odin's about to unleash. So
that's a great point. I had thought about that before, but I had forgotten about it. Yeah, that's exactly what we're seeing here. That there is I even think by the end of the poem, Odin says to Agnar that the proper relationship between the gods has been restored. So not to spoil too much, but I do think that's coming.
Yeah, it is. Next episode, stay tuned.
Yeah. That's a pretty big thing for this 10-year-old to have done.
Yes, absolutely. And definitely that's the implication, I think.
Definitely. So stanza 4. And what we're about to see is Odin sharing the reward with Agnar for giving the drink, and it being sort of cosmic knowledge. Back to the poem. I see a holy land which lies near those of the gods and the elves. In that place, Thrudheim, Thor will live till Ragnarok.
Yeah, so exactly, you got it. This is Odin revealing his knowledge to Agnar as a reward, essentially, for offering his hospitality. And he revealed himself as well at the end of the last stanza. Like he said, let me go back to that. Hail Agnar, it's the chief of the gods who's wishing you well, right? So I mean, that's he's revealing himself. He has let Agnar know what kind of is going on here, and yeah, I mean, maybe this transition is a little funny that it goes straight from that to just, here is this hall, but no, it's good information, as we're going to see here. So digging right into it here, Thrudheim. So this is Thor's hall, and as much as we've gotten into some of his stories, we'll get a lot more into Thor in different ones though. But if we're remembering some of the key details here, the key stories he's involved in, at least in Ragnarok, he's the one who kills the Midgard serpent, which functionally destroys the world. I think is what we came to as a broad conclusion. Definitely check that episode out, episode 3 on Ragnarok. I think it's one of my favorites we've done so far.
Me too.
But Thor, big strong guy, protector of Midgard, and he lives in Thrudheim, which means the world of strength or the home of strength. How perfect is that? Honestly, a bit self-explanatory. Thor's a big, strong guy. What's the name of my house? Strong Home. Good for him. But and it's interesting that it's near the gods and the elves. I think in this case, proximity implies affinity. I mean, first of all, Thor is one of the most important gods that we're going to see. But there's something interesting about him being near elves as well, which there's many types of elves, 3 main ones that are mentioned in the various stories here, but the one that's usually referred to as the home of the elves is the light elves, which I think is something to do with positive spirits of nature, something like that. So I think the implication is something like he's fond of nature and the natural world, but yeah, maybe that's reading into that a little bit, but yeah, I think that's just a little detail there.
For sure. I've also heard of elves being described as honored ancestors. Yeah, I'm not really sure which one is right, but I think being known as light elves and the idea that they're beautiful and all that kind of stuff is sort of the important takeaway, is that they're beautiful and that they're light and life-giving and all that kind of stuff.
Tolkien-style elves and dwarves are cribbed directly out of this. Like,
absolutely,
they are based directly on the Norse idea of elves and dwarves, which are the dark elves. It's direct from it, and so I mean, if you want a little bit of at least his interpretation, Tolkien's interpretation is these bright creatures that live forever and are
It's a pretty safe bet to imagine Legolas as I wanted to mention a little bit, too, about Thor, that we talked about this in previous episodes. Thor being a symbol of order and an order maker. And we see in the Völuspá, after the war between the Aesir and Vanir, getting upset that I believe the Aesir go back on their word. As well, he's fighting the Midgard serpent, whose name I can't remember, Jormungandr? Yeah, Jormungandr. And he's like a dragon in the great depths. I mean, you don't get more chaotic than that. So you really see he's really going up against chaos. He's sort of the opposing force. And then I always look at his weapon, a hammer, which is it's a building tool. It's something that literally makes order. So Odin is kind of telling Agnar that if you want order and you want to see the place of order, this is where it is, being Thrudheim and with Thor. And that's really important because Thor was he was known as a friend to humans. He wasn't this sort of far off god. Like he was beloved. So, and I think that's why he's first in the stanzas as well, is that you're sort of having the paragon of order and good and the friend that you can depend on.
I really like that. Thor, we're going to visit him a lot more, and it's absolutely correct that he was the most beloved god. I mean, that's in place names. That's in just the symbol of the Thor's hammer. That's found tons in archaeology. That is just a symbol that people wore. He was the most beloved god. That's generally well known here now, scholarly.
For sure, even in the temple at Uppsala, his god pole was in the center, and Odin, who was still, the Allfather and everything, and Thor's father, he was off to one side, and Freyr was off to the other side. But Thor was the the centerpiece, as it were. Shall we move on?
Let's do it.
Back to the poem. Ull has built good halls for himself in Yladir. The gods gave Frey the land of Alfheim long ago as a gift in his youth.
So it's we get a fair bit of detail in this one stanza here. So Ull is an interesting figure. We don't know actually a whole lot about him, but he's generally associated with archery, and so I'm going to circle back to this. But his home being Yladir, which translation is yew dales, as in the yew tree. Yews make very good bows, apparently, and so him being associated with archery, that kind of makes sense. But I want to go to a little bit about the name of Ull, and he's associated with, again, archery, and I think skiing as well. Some interesting motifs, so sort of sport, something like that. The sports that would have been played at in the time of the Norse sort of thing there, and they certainly had bows and skis, and that's interesting, right? I mean, the Norwegians, they just cleared up at the Winter Olympics just a little while ago, and I mean, it was all in like the skiing events and things like that. But the name Ullr eventually comes from the Proto-Germanic root word wulthaz, or wulthuz, meaning glory. And so here's something. So archery, first of all, being tied to a god who's named after glory. So what's more glorious than hitting the target and winning the prize, something like that? I mean, I think most people know about Robin Hood, which is, he's the best archer in the land. He hits the mark. And the concept of hitting the mark, the idea of sin is actually it just means to miss the mark in the sense of archery specifically. That's where the term came from. And this is a god that's about glory and about hitting the mark. And so it's just interesting to me that maybe that is sort of the idea of Ullr, and the idea is something like aim for something and try your best, and I don't know, just all the cliches about sports. I mean, it doesn't matter if you win, it's how you play the game, sort of thing. And I think that's something like this concept, aiming for glory. I think that's what Ullr means as a collection of the various fragments that we have about him. That's what I take out of Ullr, and we really don't see him much more often than this, and there's some possibility that the fact that we don't even see him anywhere else, we see him I think once or twice in the Prose Edda, but many other gods are talked about much more in detail in the Prose Edda, and it just could be that he was starting to fade in memory. That's something that happens. Certain gods just start to become less important, and their stories get told less, and that could have been what was already happening to Ullr even in that time, but we don't have a lot written down about him. So that's just one detail that I think I can piece together about him based on what we know.
That's interesting. When I read about Ullr, I actually went more the hunting route, that with the bow, you need a good bow for hunting, but the sport, it all ties in, right? And going for glory, if you were a good hunter, you definitely had glory within your tribe because you were feeding them. And I think it's interesting that they've sort of coupled Ull with Frey, because Frey is sort of the god of prosperity and like farming and that kind of thing. So you've got hunting and farming together in this one stanza. And just to build on the idea that Ull might have been getting forgotten, because when you're talking about the things that he oversaw with like archery and skiing, it reminded me a lot of the things that Skadi looks after. And there's a lot of stories about Skadi. So I wonder if she kind of absorbed his role in the tribes and the Germanic beliefs. So
that was my next point. Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
Perfect. No, exactly right. And we're going to see more of Skadi in this story already. So, and not to gloss over Frey. I mean, he's important on his own right, but he really only gets half a stanza here too. And I mean, Frey is associated with, as you said, agriculture, fertility, prosperity. Yeah, he's a big deal, and we see a lot of him. He's got really his own story coming up quite soon here, actually. But he's given the land of the elves, Alfheim, and in his youth, and I think this is where literally that he's given it as a gift when he gets his first tooth, something like that. But it's all the same deal here. But that's what actually sort of got me into something like the elves might be the sort of natural characters, but I also like the idea of ancestors as well. That really the elves and the dwarves are really, really hard to nail down what exactly they are and what they signify, because there's just so little about them.
For sure. I mean, I don't want to get too off track, but I have even seen theories that like dwarves are like aliens or something, gray aliens, and I'm just like, okay. That's a whole other episode though.
Yeah. Northern Myths Podcast, Ancient Aliens Edition.
Yeah. I would like to talk a little bit about Frey. Just that he was also a very important god. He was also in Uppsala, as I mentioned before, and his whenever they made statues of him or god poles or images, they gave him an enormous phallus because he is the god of prosperity or fertility and prosperity. I guess both fit, but so he and actually his story that we'll get into later on. I don't think it's in here, but in the Prose Edda, certainly. There's a whole story about him basically seeing this beautiful woman and needing her and then going after her and just driven and willing to give up anything for her. So the large phallus really fits him, I would say.
It's actually the next story coming up, I'm pretty sure.
Awesome.
It is in the Poetic Edda, so we'll hit that here. I mean, I can confirm that. Yeah, it's the next story. So 3-ish episodes from now, maybe. Yeah. We're going a bit slowly here, but no, exactly. Fertility, prosperity. I mean, that's something about gods of agriculture in general that really have to do a lot with the concept of fertility that agriculture really signified, the idea of seed going into the ground, seed to get literal or whatever, going into the ground, and then something good and positive kind of springing back up. That's some of the original, the oldest forms of religion that we have evidence of is really those sorts of fertility cults, and there's something to the idea that the Vanir are all a little more to do with this kind of fertility aspect, and whereas the Aesir are a little more to do with the cultural aspects. There is something to that, and it could be that the Vanir are at least this older element of religion that's still kind of sticking around in the by the time of the 10th to 13th centuries, right? So
definitely, and I'm just thinking now with Ullr and Frey being together. So I mentioned the hunting and the farming, but as a culture sort of develops, they become more into the farming than the hunting. So I think we might actually be seeing one of the period where there's the boundaries are murky and they're doing both like to a big degree.
That's really interesting. Where these stanzas are in relation to each other is darn well important, and I hadn't thought about that. That's a really interesting point. I think you're onto something there.
Yeah, especially because Ullr kind of drifts off into memory, and then not even memory. So
yeah, hunting,
I don't know. It's interesting.
Well, even today, hunting is sort of like it's a sport now. You don't have to go and hunt a deer to be able to have meat or anything like that. And who has, other than Joe Rogan, who has elk every day, right? Like
for sure.
So,
all right, shall we move on?
Yeah, that was a good one though.
That was stanza number 6. Back to the poem. I know a third place where happy gods live beneath a silver roof. It's called Valaskjalf, the place Odin made himself in the old days.
Okay, so we're going to see that Odin has more than one hall. So maybe that's something to do with the Pareto principle, where the people who have stuff, they really have a lot of stuff. Odin's got a lot of halls. So this is the first one that we're going to see about, and it's not Valhalla. So I mean, that's just that's just something in general. That's not even the one that's most well known, even in all the mythology. That's not even the first one that we're mentioning here that Odin has. So this one though is really interesting to me. So the name Valaskjalf is literally shelf of the slain, or if it's not shelf, it's something similar to shelf. In a more modern pronunciation, it would actually be essentially Valaskjalf is.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So that's
interesting,
right? It's kind of transparent. All these kind of cognates here between the North Germanic languages and English, which is a West Germanic language. Indulge my nerdy linguistic things for a minute there, but yeah, thank you for indulging me anyway. But yeah, this is interesting to me because first of all, they're saying it's a place where the happy gods live, and yet it's the shelf of the slain. And so, I mean, it's kind of interesting to me that this might be. It makes a little more sense to me if the Vala part is a little more about many of the names of Odin. Valfather is one of them, right? The father of the slain. So I mean, this is not saying that that's part of his name necessarily, but it could essentially just refer to that this is a hall of Odin because he's the father of the slain, and maybe that's kind of a shorthand. But I'm getting kind of away from myself here. But happy gods live there, so I mean this obviously has to be some kind of place where good things happen, nice things happen, and it's one of Odin's halls. So he's not just a god of death; he's a god of happy things, and that's just an important piece to know about his character, is that he's still about living life, I suppose, is just something to, he's still about enjoying life when he gets the occasion to. It's not just about this constant search for knowledge or this obsession with the dead or something like that. He still has to enjoy life sometimes.
Oh, for sure. I think art and poetry also come from Odin. So no, he definitely enjoys the finer things. And I think this is a good example of that. It was funny when I was reading it, I took it to kind of mean that, well, it's a place that Odin made himself in the old days, and I wondered if it was almost a prototype for Valhalla, and that he started with a shelf, but then moved on to this grand hall. And the only thing that makes me think of that is the old days. So what was Odin doing when he was young? So I don't know, but yeah, no, I really like what you're saying there about it seems to be a happy place.
Yeah, unfortunately, in a lot of these cases, we're not really going to get a lot of information out of these words and descriptions other than the literal translations of these place names, but it's still helpful. And Hlidskjalf is theoretically in this Valaskjalf, so it's the same root word there, shelf. It's the same Hlidskjalf, Valaskjalf. It's the same word there. So there's something to it that this is kind of the place where Odin goes to see over the world. I believe it's actually correct that Hlidskjalf is in it or on top of it or something like that. So yes. It's interesting detail there, and maybe that's a light distinction here, where it's sort of, this is maybe the place where Odin goes to oversee the world. That's sort of a passive thing to do, right? Like you're going and watching, you're reactive. It's not like maybe you are actively looking for something, but if you're just surveying the world, seeing what's going on, that's kind of, maybe that's the equivalent of television or something like that, like in a very cosmic sense.
Yeah, that's interesting. And having that there in this hall, it almost seems like a throne room, or so. Yeah, a happy place. Like, this isn't where the glorious dead come to fight their unending battle in preparation for Ragnarok, which I think would also be a fun place, but maybe not as happy as.
That's right. A different thing, different purpose.
Shall we move on?
Yeah.
Stanza number 7. Back to the poem. A fourth hall is Sokkvabekk, which the cool waves crash upon. There, Odin and Saga drink happily every day from golden cups.
So this one, I think, was actually one of the most interesting when I really dug into it after a little while there. So Sokkvabekk and Saga, these could be bynames for Frigg and her hall Fensalir, which I think either we're going to touch on later here or it's mentioned in a different place. But it's possible that these are alternative names for Frigg's hall and for Frigg herself, just to fit into the poetic line here. They did that. They had alternative forms that had different first letters. That's the big part of how their poetry was put together, was the use of multiple words of the same first letter, alliteration being the term there. And so this could have been just a case where this is a good alternate name for something that goes by the letter F normally, but a letter S is better in this case. But just to go off the meanings here, and this is why this could be this kind of the same here. Sokkvabekk means sunken banks, whereas Fensalir is fen halls, fen being a type of a marsh. And Sokkvabekk, the cool waves crash upon it, and so it sort of implies that it's kind of near water. So in all the cases, it's kind of similar. And Saga, the name Saga, kind of comes from, it could be related to the word to see, or possibly the word to say. It could be something like that. And it's the implication is that it's referring to Osiris, who is able to see things and say things. And Frigg is referred to as Osiris, particularly in the Lokasena, which we'll tackle pretty quick here, actually, for our pace anyway. But Frigg is referred to as Osiris in that particular case. So what this eventually gets to for me is that this could describe this is where Odin and Frigg live happily together and drink mead. So isn't that nice? Or they drink from golden cups. It doesn't necessarily have to be mead, but I think they probably drink some mead.
I would say mead. Yeah. I totally agree with what you're saying, and I looked at it, and it looks to me like Odin hanging out in the sort of with the chaotic feminine in the water, and drinking with it. Drinking with the feminine, in this case, sort of the divine feminine, who he has made his wife. So I've written down here, he's drinking his daily dose of digestible chaos.
That's amazing. That's wow.
Which is what we all should be doing, right? Is having our daily dose of digestible chaos so that we can grow and have our one foot in the area that is known, and then 1 foot in the area that's unknown.
Wow, I didn't even go there with this one. That's nice.
And isn't it nice he's doing it with his wife?
Yes, exactly. I think that's what I focused on here, because
definitely.
Well, the name Saga. I mean, it could be. I could be getting this exactly wrong. It could be related though to what we know today as sagas, like the stories of heroes and stuff like that. I mean, that's the first place that I originally went. I don't know if it's the exact same word there. It could be, but originally I thought that this was sort of a separate character, but this is nice to me that it's just the husband and wife, and they live together here and they drink happily every day. That's cool. I like that.
And I think too, that's kind of what a husband and wife are supposed to do for each other, is in one instance be that safe spot, but also that daily dose of chaos, because they are an entirely different person, and like we all know how annoying that can be. Like because it's chaotic, and you can have this person that you love intensely and immensely, but there's still a whole other person, and you can't control it. So and you learn so much just from that in itself.
Well, you don't want your spouse to be someone who just only loves you, like, and there's no negative. There was some statistics that Dr. Peterson talked about, something like, if you have one negative interaction for every 10 positive reactions, that's a good number to keep you together, because you want someone that you can contend with, who is a surprise, and you don't want it to be just this boring boring thing. And obviously, if you have too much negative interaction, it's just not going to work out. But if you have too little, it's not going to be enough. You're never going to learn from each other. You're never going to grow. So
No, exactly.
I like this a lot. And either way, Odin lives happily sometimes and enjoys life, and he spends time with wise women. So, regardless of this is definitely Frigg in her hall there, that's what Odin is doing, is he's spending his time drinking happily with a wise woman of some kind. But I like it better if it's his wife.
Me too. And there is support for that idea. Yeah.
Enough support.
It's not just us, wishing that it was. There is support. So yeah, I like that interpretation as well.
I like this verse a lot. Definitely when I dug into it a bit more, and the meanings of the words, that was something that I thought was pretty cool.
Definitely. Shall we move on?
Let's do it.
Hey, verse 8. Back to the poem. A fifth land is Gladsheim, where gold bright wide Valhalla stands. That is where Odin chooses from the men killed by weapons every day.
So here we go. Valhalla. I think if people are going to know one place from Norse mythology, it's probably going to be Valhalla. Maybe Asgard, but Valhalla, most likely. So first of all, Gladsheim, bright home is what that literally translates to. And we're going to see a theme here of these houses being named bright. And I think that has something to do with the brightness is sort of something great. It's something shining. It's something that is brilliant. You're in awe of it when you see it. And I think it implies something like an ideal. Like these places have something ideal about them. They have something great about them. And so literally naming them bright or some kind of other word that relates to that. I think that's the theme that they're getting at here, that these are great, fantastic places to be. And that's where Valhalla is. And Valhalla certainly has its own characteristics that are interesting in and of themselves. But I just like that Gladsheim is this bright place. That's where it actually is.
Definitely. And I just think of all the good things in life that are bright. So you've got the sun, you've got gold, and the more pure the gold is, the brighter it is. Even I don't know if they would have been using iron or at the time, but certainly like bronze and things like that. The brighter they are, the stronger they are, because you've hammered out the impurities. So everything bright is good. And so you have Valhalla standing in this amazing bright place. I think it sounds about right for a destination for when you die in battle.
Exactly.
Shall we get a little deeper into Valhalla?
Let's do it.
Verse 9, I'll be doing 2, verse 9 and 10. So back to the poem. Valhalla is easily recognized if one comes to see it. The hall is held up by spear shafts. It is roofed by shields. Chainmail is on the benches. Valhalla is easily recognized if one comes to see it. A wolf hangs above the western door and an eagle above him.
So some pretty cool details here. Again, this is, I think we already know from the previous stanza, this is where Odin chooses from the men killed by weapons every day, right? So it's where the people who die go, some of them. But then the details here, so its purpose is very clear. The hall is held up by spear shafts, roofed by shields, chainmail is on the benches. That's the purpose of it is very clear. It's a place for war, a place for warriors. It's certainly not a place for people who aren't actively engaging in warfare, and so it's. I think you can compare it to like a military barracks or something like that, as far as probably its feel. Folks on the Jocko podcast, as an example, who are military veterans, they'll talk about going to places where the Navy SEALs train and they live and they work out of, and they just say they get a sense of awe out of it. This is the place where Navy SEALs train, something like that, and for people who know what that's about, like, that's a big deal. And I think that's something similar here. Like, its purpose is very, very clear here based on what it's made out of, right?
Absolutely. There's no two ways about it. It's made out of spears and shields and chainmail. It's as clear as you can get. And and they even say it's easily recognized. Like, there's no real interpretation to be done here. It's for war and fighting. In verse 10, when they talk about the wolf hanging above the western door and the eagle above him, I thought about that for a while, and I think Valhalla it's a place of competition. They're fighting every day, and they die, and then they're resurrected and eat pork and drink mead, and then fight again and die again, and it goes on and on and on. And I think with the wolf, you have this representation of, and it doesn't say if it's like a wolf skin or anything, or just sort of a representation of a wolf. And I'm going to take it as, actually, I think this would work for either one, but in some ways they're learning how to become the best wolf they can. And wolves, they hunt in packs. They're very effective at it. And we've talked about this before, how they were seen as sort of raiders and marauders and outside of civilization. They were what you were protecting yourself against when you had settled and you were in a tribe, in a town or whatever. And if you want to be a good warrior, but also I think just a functional adult, you have to be able to be a wolf sometimes. And then with the eagle above it, it's kind of like saying you need to be the best wolf, because the eagle is a symbol of victory, and it would eat the losers of the battle. So you don't want to be the one being eaten by the eagle. You want to see it, and so you have this. You're training to be the best wolf that you can be in Valhalla.
Yeah, these symbols here, the wolf, the eagle, they're big symbols that we've seen a lot of times, and just that concept of natural ferocity. I think that's what I've gotten to as really being what the wolf really symbolizes, is that natural ferocity. I mean, Odin has wolves as pets, essentially. We'll get into that a little more in a bit here, but and then he also dies by the hand of the wolf, and so that's that natural carnivorous ferocity coming and overtaking the god of culture, essentially, right? And then the eagle, the symbol of the sky, in various cultures, the eagle is something like the seeing eye, the creature that can see everything, and it's at the top of its own dominance hierarchy. Essentially, there aren't really predators for the eagle. It's at the top, and I mean that's, I think, why the symbol is used. And you're right, like it comes down to symbols of victory, of courage, of strength, and the eagle is a great symbol, and it's used in so many places. And the combination of them here, yeah, it's telling that this is what you're going for. I really think the eagle is a shorthand for their concept of aiming high. I think that's what the eagle symbolizes for them. So
I was actually just about to say that if you hadn't. So exactly, it's them aiming high, because it's not good enough just to be a wolf, because then you're a predator in your own civilization, your own society. But having the eagle there as the goal, you're directed properly and directing that wolfish nature properly.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, the idea of directing that's fantastic. In a little bit later, we'll talk about Odin's wolves, and I'll want to get into more of that. But yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah, I like that one.
Yeah, Valhalla, man. Like, some cool things about Valhalla. We're not done with Valhalla.
No, we're not.
Not even in this episode, we won't even be done. So lots in this whole poem that's about Valhalla in particular. So
shall we move on?
Let's do it.
So verse 11, back to the poem. Thjassi, the mighty giant, once lived in the 6th hall, now known as Thrymheim. And now Skadi, or Skadi, bright bride of the gods, lives in her father's old home.
Yeah, so a good introduction here. Thjassi. I don't know about you, but I got that the etymology is actually unknown for Thjassi. I didn't get a definition from him.
I didn't get one either.
Okay, so I'm not just lazy with my my Googling. but he's a powerful giant is what we get, and there are other stories that he's in, which essentially tell him being an enemy of the gods, like a direct enemy, not just he's not just a giant who lives outside the tribe. He's a giant who's actively fighting against them. But either way, he's a powerful giant, so he's either like some kind of, tribal king or chief or something like that. That's the implication here. And he lives in Thrymheim, which I think is a cool name. It's either like something like uproar or crash or even thunder is what Thrym means. So Thrymheim, the home of uproar, the home of thunder, and it's actually probably unrelated to. There's another story that, again, we'll get to, the Lay of Thrym, which is a really humorous story, and Thor in particular is kind of around that. But there's a giant named Thrym, so this is a place named Thrym, and there's a giant named Thrym, and so it's probably unrelated. But when you get the same words here, you can't always completely discredit that. Either way, Thrym seems to be a word associated with powerful giants. So
yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I really like the name of that place too. It's pretty awesome. And they talk about again, once lived in the 6th hall, so he's no longer there. And they talk about Skadi or Skadi, the bright bride of the gods, and there's actually, I really like Skadi's story, and we'll definitely see that coming up in the future, about how she marries into the tribe, even though she's a giantess, and as we were saying, sort of the daughter of a sworn enemy. She is integrated into the tribe, and actually, I think is fairly beloved by the gods and the people. So it'll be an interesting story to see. And they say she lives in her father's old home. When she came to live in Asgard, she tried to, but it didn't suit her taste. So she moved back to where her father had lived, and she had been living by the sea in Asgard with the gods. But as a goddess of the winter and skiing and hunting and that kind of thing, there wasn't much for her to do, so she went back to the mountains where there's more for her to do.
Yeah, isn't the story something like she's there part of the year, and then she's there part of the year, but then she also descends part of the year, and that sort of alludes to something to do with the cycle of the seasons? Yes,
I think there's definitely that interpretation could be is right.
Yeah. We'll get to her story in a little more detail. Another thing that I got out of that, her story, is that her marrying into the gods. I think that was a common peace practice associated with a truce or something like that. Our kids are going to get married, therefore we're not going to be enemies anymore, sort of thing. And I think that's something similar. She's the one who's actually mad, I think, is the in her story. She's mad that the gods killed her father, and so there could be. It's interesting that she didn't demand one of the gods come out to be her husband. She joins their tribe, but maybe it's just an idea that they're the most powerful, so she joins them. But that's how they're going to get peace.
Yes, and she got to pick, and that was the kicker, as it were.
Right. So she came out ahead, I think. But yeah, she's a great goddess, great character, and I think we mentioned she she is associated with many of the same things that Ullr is associated with, just with a general winter being the kind of the overarching theme there, winter or the mountains as well being just a general overarching feature, which I think is understandable when you see like the geography of Norway. It's almost all mountainous, right? So I mean, that's something that I think could come there. Her name is unknown. The etymology again I believe is unknown, but some people theorize that her name could be related to Scandinavia, Skadi.
Oh yes,
it could be, but very much that's just speculation. So
who knows?
Still pretty cool though.
Still pretty cool. I think we'll move on to verse 12 and our good friend Baldr. Baldr built himself a hall, and it is called Breithablik. That's a place where I know you'll find little grief.
So again, another one of those where we're not really getting much out of it other than the literal meaning of the word there. But Breithablik means broad gleaming. So again, another instance of glittering or gleaming or something like that, or brightness, right? And I mean, he is known as the bright god or the shining god himself. So I mean that's already, you understand that he is already some kind of an ideal. But then his home. So that makes sense that his home would also be kind of this broad gleaming and a kind of an ideal, and no impurities as well. You'll find little grief there. I believe in other translations here, or more literally, it's that there's not no baleful runes or baneful runes, magic signifying grief or negativity or something like that. That you won't find that there. So I mean, there's something to them sort of saying, yeah, this is a place where there isn't anything negative, there isn't anything bad, and it's associated with Baldr, this ideal picture of a god. So
definitely, it just struck me. And I could be wrong on this. However, often when you think of Vikings, they die and go to Valhalla, and that's sort of what popular culture knows. But there's all these other places that you could potentially go as well. I mean, this one doesn't sound too bad.
You'd have to be a really good person, though.
Really good
to get there.
Maybe worth it.
Maybe, yeah.
So move on?
Yeah, there wasn't much to that one, unfortunately.
No.
Just some more details about Baldr, though, which is never a bad thing.
Verse 13, back to the poem. Heimdall inhabits the 8th hall, Himinbjorg. That is where he is the master. In that pleasant house the watchman of the gods happily drinks his good mead.
So Heimdall, we've only talked about him once, and I think that was right at the beginning of the first episode, actually. There, Heimdall is given a mention there in the very first stanza of the Voluspa, and he is essentially the guardian of Asgard, the watcher of Asgard, and really, I think that you can extend that to he's the keeper of borders and boundaries, and ensuring that there's nothing negative coming in that's going to attack the home of the gods. And he's a great character. He's involved in a few stories, but the biggest detail about him is just that he is the guardian of Asgard. His home, Himinbjorg, it literally means heaven's castle or heaven's mountain. And I mean, like, I think that's just, a castle in the more direct sense is like a fortress is something that is there for protection. So if he lives in the fortress of heaven, I mean, that's quite something. He's kind of the guardian, the watcher there. And the bridge to Asgard, the Bifrost Bridge is it arrives at Himinbjorg. So that's just kind of something there. His name is a little bit obscure. It's not at least there's no agreed upon definition for his name, but it could be something like one who illuminates the world or something like that. So he's an interesting figure and a good character.
For sure. He is known as so if Baldr is the brightest, then Heimdall is known as the whitest god, and with the idea of illumination, I would say. And he also has the ability to see as far as possible, or supernaturally far, I guess, and to hear supernaturally well. He sacrificed an ear into the which well was it? Mimir. That's right. Very similar to Odin sacrificing his eye, and there is speculation that Heimdall is also a magician of sorts, not to the level that they would recognize Odin as being, but still having a lot of the same abilities, or at least on the way to having that. So very interesting god.
Very, very interesting. Honestly, I don't think there's enough about him in these stories here. There are some, but it's unfortunate that there isn't more about him, because he's very interesting, and especially the idea that he's the keeper of the boundary.
Yes.
In Asgard. First of all, that just emphasizes the importance of having good boundaries and good borders, that, you've got the safe, secure things inside, and then you've got the outside world. And that's a theme that the worlds are arranged based on the inside and the outside, the known and the unknown. There's Asgard, and then there's Jotunheim, there's Midgard, and then there's Hell. There's these places that are considered safe and secure, and then there's the outside world. And him being the guardian of that, I think that's very important, actually. But again, he's mentioned in a few other places, a few other stories, but not many by comparison. So
no. And while you're talking about being the guardian of borders, he also, in one story, creates the structure of society, and I guess, for lack of a better term, the caste system, which in itself is guarding the boundaries of society. So Heimdall really is about keeping things in order and keeping what's outside, and what's inside, and functioning right.
Right, and I think he would probably score pretty high in orderliness in the
Definitely
personality test there. But this isn't to say that there's gods who are very much 1 foot in the unknown inside the outside world, and that's just to say that there are folks that are less into having these borders and these boundaries, but there are people who are, and we need both of them. We need the people who want to live on the edge, on the boundaries, and that's where creation and innovation happens. That's literally living on the border of chaos, right? But we also need the sort of people who maintain borders and boundaries, because their security is important, because it safeguards the things that culture as a whole has worked hard to build, and so maintaining that is important as well. So that's just to say that he is an important part, just the same way that Thor on all his adventures is important, or Odin going out and seeking knowledge is important. Heimdall is also important. His role is important.
Definitely. It's kind of like securing the ground that you've already captured or developed, and then moving from there without putting it at risk. And that is, I guess, the ideal, is that he's kind of the foot in the known, which you need, and then you have Odin, who's probably the foot in the unknown. But at the same time, Heimdall is able to see into the unknown and hear into the unknown. So he is vigilant in safeguarding it. But it is interesting. He's kind of the one that keeps it all together and working.
Yeah, it's not like he's insular, because no. I don't think there's going to be any good argument or reason to be insular. You do want to have at least exposure to outside ideas, right? Like that's something that you do want to have, but his role is just that sort of person that is going to protect what you've already got, I think, like you were saying, but still expose yourself to outside ideas. And you have to pay attention to the outside world, outside ideas, in order to know what might be coming at you, which
absolutely.
I think that's the core of his sacrifice of his ear. To put it in Mimir as well, episode 2, I went really into this one. We both did. The idea of Mimir's well essentially symbolizing the flow of fate into the unknown, and that's the good reason why Odin put his eye there, and why Heimdall put his ear there, is because you don't want your one eye in the known, you want it in the unknown. You don't want your ear in the known, you want it in the unknown. And that's where you pay attention, and where you get that additional knowledge that you wouldn't get just by being in your own spot. So no matter what, even this character that is, the keeper of borders and boundaries, he's still got his ear on the unknown. So
definitely.
Really like Heimdall.
Shall we move on?
Let's do it.
Verse 14. Back to the poem. Freya rules in the ninth land, Folkfang. That is where she arranges the seats. She chooses half the dead who die in battle, and Odin takes the other half.
Okay, so this one, I think we eventually got to this one being one of the trickiest to really flesh out its importance and its meaning. So what it's saying here is that Freya chooses half the dead. And not just in this stanza, but in others, I think they do imply that Freya gets to choose first.
Yes.
Which is really interesting because, first of all, Odin is supposedly the father of the slain, the father of the dead, and he's the one who's most associated with it. But then there's Freya, who is very, very clearly a war goddess. Now that we see her ruling over a realm of the dead, and yeah, it's just really interesting that she gets to choose first. And the only thing that I can really get to is that this is some kind of alternative, possibly something to do with feminine influence, like we were seeing, the integration of the two sides of it. Maybe there does have to be that side of it that is ruled by the feminine sort of thing. But I'm really at a loss actually for exactly what this stanza means, and it is possible that we've lost some key meaning. There's some scholars who speculate that. I think H.R. Ellis Davidson, a fantastic scholar of Old Norse and of Old Norse history and things like that. She speculated that this one just might be something we've really lost the key meaning of, unfortunately. So.
Well, if she thinks that makes me feel a lot better about not knowing anything. One thing I could get, Folkfang means something like army field, and the people who go to this place, they also engage in sort of that endless battle that you see in Valhalla, and there's a lot of similarities actually between Valhalla and this place, so it makes it very curious about what is the difference between the two. I wondered if it was when the Aesir and Vanir came together, if she was sort of the psychopomp, or the person who ferries the dead over for the Vanir, and Odin being the one for Aesir, and so they kind of merged the two so that there, I guess, sort of less infighting, but you wouldn't have to choose. You could sort of figure out the gods and goddesses would figure out for you which place you were going to go, and that would sort of equalize it and smooth things over so that there could be better integration of the two tribes.
Yeah, that really is the only other thing that I personally thought of, was just the fact that it's these different tribes, different possible destinations, and that's one way of integrating that. And maybe on a cosmic sense, maybe that just says something like, if you have different personalities or different maybe different ideas about life. Like I went to maybe men who have a family or are more family oriented and maybe more in tune with some of these feminine ideas. Maybe they would go there and they would be happier there, versus Valhalla maybe as more of just a rah big military setting sort of thing. But then, the name of the thing, like the field of the army, like, okay, like that's still pretty clear. So, I mean, it's, really, all of this is just guessing as far as I'm concerned, and I want to be very clear about that. Like, this is pure speculation, but
wild speculation.
But it's still interesting to me, and I think even just these little ideas here give us some hint of why there might be these different destinations here, right? So,
for sure. Shall we move on to the next verse?
Sure thing.
Verse 15. Back to the poem. The 10th hall is Glitnir, with gold walls and a silver roof. The god named Forseti is there on most days, and he settles disputes.
Here's another interesting one. Glitnir, shining splendor. Again, some kind of ideal here, I think. And I mean, that's just continuing this line of, so Odin has a hall that is glittering and ideal. Baldr has a hall that is glittering and ideal and bright, something like that. And then Forseti down on the line here, and that's actually a direct lineage there. So Baldr being the son of Odin, and then Forseti is the son of Baldr. So that's just something really interesting. He's an interesting god in his own right, Forseti. So his name actually means the presiding one, or literally the president, essentially. And he's especially associated with justice, and in particular, the justice that we would almost associate with the court system today. Like literally the sense of someone presiding over disputes, which we just saw here, or of mediating over what today we would know as a court case or something like that. So it's interesting that they actually had a character that was just for that. The law, the execution of law, was considered very important to them, and I think that's a detail that some people might overlook in general, but they had a god associated with it, and he's directly descended from Odin. I think the implication there is something, first of all, that the justice, or the execution of justice, coming directly from Baldr, the ideal god, which I think really is his role. He is the ultimate god here, the ideal that you kind of aim for there. So he is an extension of Baldr as his son, right? Maybe a more specific aspect of this kind of ideal, and then that directly comes from Odin, the god of inspiration, knowledge, sacrifice, wisdom. It's an interesting progression. Maybe the refinement of elements of culture.
Definitely, I would definitely agree with that. And I wanted to bring up a contrast between Forseti and Tyr, who's also, he's a god of justice, but where Forseti is the mediator, Tyr is kind of the executioner, is too strong of a word, but definitely his sense of justice is, there's no mercy in it. It's either right or wrong, and wherever it falls, he's going to, go with that to the nth degree. Whereas with Forseti, that you've got wiggle room in like humanity, and you're not going to have things done like cruel and unusual punishment. Whereas with Tyr, if that's what the crime called for, then you were going to get it. I mean, you have to remember, Tyr is the one who wouldn't break an oath to save his right hand when he put it into Fenrir's mouth. Like that's who you're dealing with. So there's no sympathy there. It's just right or wrong, and what's the outcome of it. With Forseti, there seems to be sort of that, a very, I'd say, modern concept that the punishment has to suit the crime and has to be reasonable and all that kind of stuff. Like I really see the direct line from Forseti to the law that we recognize today. Like there isn't, you can see like this is where it sort of started, and it really hasn't changed that much since then.
No, Anglo-Saxon common law, English common law is directly the legal system in Canada, the US, Britain. It comes directly from that. Different modern interpretations of it, of course, but that's directly where it came from. So, and just to clarify, if you don't know, like Anglo-Saxon, it's basically the cousin of the Norse. Like they're effectively the same culture at the end of the day. They just have slightly different languages and histories and things like that, but they're broadly the same. They got lots of the same ideas out there. So this is really just really similar here. And I like that you brought up Tyr. I mean, he is an old god. His name is actually related to Zeus and to the Indian Dios Pater, which is one of the oldest gods in the Indian tradition. And they all just mean God. They all just mean God as a generic term. And so Tyr, it's implied that he was originally the head of the pantheon, especially when compared to Zeus, who is like the big guy in Greek. But he eventually lost that. And so I'm going to go down the rabbit hole a little bit.
Let's do it. I'm excited.
Just a little. So his decrease in status to me is something to do with his inflexibility. The story of the it would be the tyrannical father in this case, I think would be something that is Tyr represents. He is the father who is willfully blind, who doesn't necessarily integrate and see the new ideas, who has to be rescued from the underworld by his son or his descendant in order to properly integrate the old ideas with the new. And so Tyr is still around, but he's not the top god. And that's the same thing in the case of the Egyptian story with Osiris being, the kind of the head god, and he eventually gets willfully blind and gets taken out by Seth, his brother, and rescued by his son Horus, who integrates the lessons of his father with the new, which he represents, and the two of them together symbolize the kind of the ongoing concept of the king and the god Ra, essentially, for them. And I just cannot help but think that there's something to that. Tyr declining in status is something like him being willfully blind and inflexible, and other gods eventually become more important because his ideas become stale and outdated. And this is not to say anything bad about Tyr necessarily. There's a place for that inflexibility in the case of especially justice or keeping oaths and things like that. And I think we saw that stays on in a kind of a line of continuity. But then you eventually get another god, Forseti, that represents more of a modern take on justice. So
definitely, as you're talking, I was thinking you have Tyr, who was willfully blind to the danger that Fenrir posed, because he was raising Fenrir as his not a dog, but not even pet, just as raising him. I mean, there's part of the family. Blind to the fact that he was Loki's child and was going to grow in power immensely to the point where no one would be able to stop him. And then he makes the oath that puts his hand in Fenrir's mouth, and then Fenrir eats his hand, and disabling him. It's his right hand, it's his sword hand. Like, this is a big deal. So he's no longer able to fulfill the role of the leader at all because he doesn't have a hand. So I think you're right. Now, unfortunately, we're missing a story about his redemption, but I would read that story. That'd be a great one.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's the whole thing here. I love seeing the parallels here, and no word of a lie here. Like, this just came up for me with you bringing up Tyr, and then just going down that line of thinking for me. But I do think that is his archetype. That is the myth that he represents. And I couldn't find that in this tradition before, because Odin, I do not think represents the willfully blind father. He is a father figure, and he is certainly, especially in the context of Ragnarok, he is the before. Like, he is the old generation that is eventually going to die, but he is not willfully blind. Like, that is, I can't stress that enough. Like he is searching for knowledge. He is searching for new ways of doing things, wisdom. I think Odin, in a lot of ways, is the fusion of the hero story into something like how you continually make that happen over the long term. Like, he has an emphasis on passing it on to future generations. Like, he wants to keep it going, versus the willfully blind father to redemption through a son. That's a single generation story to me. Maybe I'll clarify that. The implication for the Egyptians anyway was that the pharaoh was always an incarnation of the god Ra, so there was that aspect of it kind of continuing forward. But it's a single story, right? It's a single generational cycle that's being played out over multiple generations, if that makes sense. But no, I was looking for this. And Tyr now makes sense, right?
Definitely. I wonder if Odin is the kind of the hero in flux, and we're the stories that we're seeing are Odin in the middle of his heroic journey, so that he does not become the willfully blind father, and has the foresight to make sure that his society is going to pass on to Baldr. And Baldr being like the end goal. Especially with Odin's focus on sacrifice, it's almost like he's the embodiment of the sacrifices that have to be made by the father to get to the son, so that he's not the old willfully blind father. He's sort of,
Yeah, like, this is like, for Odin here, isn't that another goal here too, is to live your life from beginning to end, embodying Odin, like never becoming the willfully blind father, even if you reach that stage of life? Shouldn't it be a goal that you continue to live with that search for knowledge? You continue to try to improve yourself and to stay relevant. It's when you become, not to be too harsh about it, but it's when you start to become irrelevant and your ideas no longer work or fit with the world I think your life starts to get worse at that point. And
I would agree.
That's the story of the willfully blind father. But here Odin is continually living that. And well, I mean, that's why his stories work so well. I think you're right. It's that he is in the middle of doing it, and he is never done. He is never done until Ragnarok. Like his sacrifice and his journey is never complete. And I think that's fantastic for life in general, because I mean, that just says you can get meaning out of your life as long as you live until you die. Like that is something great. And if you follow the example of Odin, that's what you'll get.
Yeah, that's great. Imagine having meaning in your life for the whole thing. That's a pretty good way of doing it.
And please, someone out there who is listening or watching, if you know of any example of this in other stories or other cultures where it's done sort of like that with Odin, where he is, first of all, the father type figure, but he is still continually searching and growing. Because, I mean, I think we do differentiate that from other hero stories such as Horus, such as Marduk, where they are definitively the son who is coming to reclaim the father. Odin sort of is the father who is continually improving himself. I don't know of any example in other cultures or traditions. So if someone else knows, please let us know, because that'd be cool to see. But on the other hand, it would also be cool if this is something unique.
For sure. Either one would be pretty neat to see. Yeah, I would love that, if one or the other. I don't care if it's unique or if there's another one I just want to see. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, there is something to my mind that I think the idea and the concept of Odin really is what makes Norse mythology, Germanic mythology, however you want to describe it. I think that is the concept that makes it truly unique. The ideas that Odin encompasses all at once together are something special, but it would be really cool to see if this is echoed somewhere else. So yeah, please let us know. Definitely.
And I definitely don't know enough about Shiva in Hinduism, but I do know there are often parallels drawn between them. So that's probably a place to start if you're looking for it. And I'll probably go home and check this out myself. But yeah, just there's a lot of interesting things going on. It'd be interesting to see how other cultures kind of came around to these ideas. And yeah, that's great. Like we start on Forseti, go through Tyr into Odin, and that was a good one. That was a good one. Shall we climb out of this rabbit hole and continue on?
Yeah, I think
sounds good. So verse 16, the 11th hall is Njorth, or Njord, I guess, as well, which he built and named Noatun. That flawless lord of men rules that high-timbered temple.
So another character we could talk a lot about I think it was the 5th episode of Thrudheim. I think it was in that one that we talked about Njord a little bit about, maybe it was in one of the Voluspa episodes. I can't remember, but I always have to mention that Njord originally was probably related to the goddess Nerthus, which it was a sort of an earth goddess, very much associated with fertility and the concept of being Mother Earth, and somehow evolved into a male figure associated with the sea. interesting kind of how that happened, but it's very clear that was some sort of continuity, or at the very least, they might have been a husband-wife pair, even though Njord eventually has other spouses and details, other stories to cover that, I think. But Njord, end of the day, is the god of the sea. He's not the only god associated with the sea, but he's especially associated with seafaring and sailing, and his home means ship enclosure. So I mean that's something right there. He building ships or has ships or something like that. And I thought that Njord is originally one of the Vanir, and actually Freyr and Freya both are his children. I think that's the right detail there. But he joins the Aesir and is one of them, right, for a very long time. And I think that's something like his joining the Aesir is the culture being able to go over the sea, which if you think of Vikings, like that's their whole deal is going and sailing and raiding and stuff like that. And I think Njord is a massive part of that. And him going and joining the Aesir is the culture being able to master the sea. So
definitely. And I like that they have a god who deals with the sea, because the sea, as we've talked about many times now, it's a symbol of the unknown, of chaos, of potential. And you have Njord's, hall, it's sort of a safe haven that you can launch off from into the unknown. And I also like they talk about the high timbered temple, and I imagine that has something to do with it being near the sea and wanting to stay out of the water, but rising out of it, kind of thing. And just that you do have a god who's right there with you when you're setting off into the unknown or into the sea. And I think that's sort of what they're getting at. And it struck me that Odin is kind of going through the gods and their areas, or I guess like their halls and some of their areas of expertise. And it struck me that is definitely something that you would want to know, and it would be good knowing sort of who you would want to interact with in various things you're going to do throughout the day. And I think that's part of the reward for Agnar, is that he's now figuring out, or he's being taught what he has to go to deal with whatever he's facing. So, he's getting all these different tools in his tool belt, as it were.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and I agree certainly that that is the reward. And I mean, maybe it seems a little strange that he's listing out places, but it's a place associated with a particular god and something that the god does, or not necessarily something that the god does, but implying something that the god does. And yeah, that's what you want to know. That's what you want to know, kind of who is associated with what, and what aspects of your life could be improved by associating yourself with this god. And I mean, I think that's a big concept, first of all, within polytheistic religions in general, but also, I mean, if you go monotheistic, Jesus as being the high aim for Christians in general is to emulate Jesus and his sacrifice and things like that. On a polytheistic perspective, you've got all of these examples that are good at or responsible for something in particular. And then if that's something that you are also interested in doing or getting involved in or something like that, there's someone you can emulate. I think that really is the way that gods develop in general. It's like, here is this mythical representation of some sort of concept, and they are almost by design, not designed, it's more organic than that, certainly, like the way that gods in these stories develop, but it's built into kind of how they are, that they are a good example of some sort of area of responsibility. So that makes sense as a reward.
Definitely. I was just thinking too, Peterson and Jung talk about this, that people don't really have ideas have people, and that this is kind of, this is one way of sort of understanding that you can now look at the ideas in your head, and instead of it just coming out of nowhere and not really knowing what to do with it, now you have these gods and symbols of where these ideas might come from and how you can interact with them in a meaningful and purposeful way. That if you didn't have a map for it or an understanding of it, you would just be getting these things like anger, and you wouldn't know what to do with it, or a desire to explore the unknown, like go seafaring, and well, okay, what do I do with that? It's kind of just a feeling that and it's sort of amorphous and a blob. But once you have like definition around it, you can start working with it.
Yeah, it's absolutely true that these are examples of the way to live in the world. That's a great way of putting it. Yeah.
Awesome. So shall we move on?
Sure thing.
Sounds good. Verse 17. The wide land of Vithar is overgrown with high grass and weeds. That bold son of Odin is preparing himself to avenge his father on horseback.
So Vidar, we've certainly met him before in the Voluspa, especially at Ragnarok there, and I think we've already touched on that his name means wide ruler, and so now I guess he rules over a wide land, so that's pretty cool for him. But it's interesting to me that what he rules over is the wilderness, and I mean that's kind of the high grass and weeds. Like, I mean, what else is that? And the wilderness is really, I mean, not a very, very small number of places are truly human populated. At the very least, back in the day, that would have been the case. But if you're a wide ruler, you've actually got a whole lot of wilderness that you're ruling over as well. And I mean, I don't know if that's really just descriptive of most of what somebody rules over is not necessarily just farmland or cities or whatever. There's a lot of wilderness there. I'm not sure if I go just based on this stanza alone further into that, but it's maybe interesting that one of these sons of Odin, who's going to be living on after Ragnarok, is the wide ruler, and maybe he's got some sort of stewardship over the environment or something like that really comes in there. But
I've got a rabbit hole to go down, I think.
Delightful.
So Odin, as a representation of civilization and society, is killed by Fenrir, who's chaos and the unknown and what's that word for like evil?
Malevolence.
Malevolence, thank you. Oh, man. So all of that destroys Odin, so huge blow to civilization. And then Vithar comes and kills Fenrir and sort of drives the chaos back. And we see him ruling over high grass and weeds, so it's an area that's overgrown. It's not developed. It is untouched by human civilization, by order. And so you have this sort of potential area that it's not developed yet, but once you fight off the chaos, then you can go develop it. And even having him on horseback, that's a very, I guess, primitive or sort of one of the first steps into ordering the chaos around you, or ordering the land around you, the nature around you is horse riding. I mean, that's how you were able to become nomadic, is that you had these beasts of burden to carry you. So I almost think he's kind of that future that he's ruling over the wide future that is possible if you're able to beat back the chaos for it.
Yeah, that's really, really cool. I didn't even go there, but now that you mention it, definitely I get that that's something like, well, since post Ragnarok, almost the whole world must already be wilderness, right? But he rules over a wide expanse of land, right? And then, I mean, what are you going to do with that? If you are someone who goes out into the unknown and wants to tame that and create culture out of that. I mean, that must just be like a fantastic playground. That's like you've got the world in front of you and you can just order it the way you want. I mean, I think that really paints an optimistic picture post Ragnarok, and that's interesting. Maybe Vidar is like he's got his realm outside, like almost fully in the unknown, whereas Baldr, I think we do get some glimpses of him still kind of having a hall or something like that. Like maybe Baldr is really the continuation of culture, but Vidar is the one who's going to eventually go out and conquer the unknown, something like that. That is pure speculation, but based on...
Yeah, for sure. And I almost wonder if that's why Vidar is silent, is that he doesn't speak until you have to go out and sort of clear the chaos so that you have that place to, I don't know. There's obviously lots here, and I'm sure in 2 years we'll look back and have all these other ideas.
I know, huh?
Yeah.
Long road ahead of us, that's for sure. Vidar, though, that's cool. I like that idea a lot.
Shall we move on?
Let's do it.
Verse 18, back to the poem. And, let's see if I can say this. And Hrimnir the cook lets the pork from Hrimnir cook in the cauldron of Hrimnir. There is no better meat, and there are few who know what the Einherjar eat.
I didn't get I think that last sentence is kind of funny. There are a few who know what the Einherjar eat, mystery meat, something. Yeah. Like, I don't think that's actually what that's saying. I think that's something like it's a place for the special few, something like that.
Definitely. Not
everyone is going to get there, but just mystery meat. That's where I went with that. But anyway, so and Hrimnir, Sahrimnir, and Eldrimnir. So and Hrimnir is the cook of the Aesir, and his name essentially translates to one exposed to soot. Sahrimnir is the sooty beast, or the sooty sea beast. He's described as a boar, so there's some theories as to how they resolve that, but anyway, he's a sooty beast. He's getting cooked. And Eldrimnir, fire, sooty thing is just what that means, and so that's the cauldron, right? So I mean, very, very literal. The cook is the one exposed to soot, and the beast you're eating is the sooty beast, and the cauldron is the sooty fire thing. And so good names anyway. But what I actually get out of this, though, is I think, isn't this like the ultimate, this be the ultimate thing for a primitive society, is to just have an unlimited source of meat that gets renewed every day? And I mean, like, you don't have to worry about it. It's just going to renew itself every day, sort of thing. I mean, like, we kind of have that now. I mean, if you talk about, like, the plight of animals and cruelty to animals, whatever, but we essentially have, like, literally just animal factories that produce meat. And I mean, like, that would have darn well been something great for, little hunter-gatherer guy from Scandinavia, right? So,
I mean, we barely know what to do with all the food that we have. Like, a tribe that actually faced scarcity, like, this is...
It'd be a dream. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that just says something like, be grateful for what we got here, because
absolutely,
this is like basically being described as like the ultimate thing. Like, this is in Valhalla, guys. Like, this is in like this exclusive place that only a few people get to go into, and they get meat just given to them. And I mean, we've gotten the world to a place where a lot of people have access to that. So that's pretty cool.
That is pretty cool. The only thing I'd like to mention is the beast that's being cooked. As when I first saw it was sooty sea beast, I was like, well, they say boar. That's weird. Like, why would there, like, boars are definitely not sea animals. And it reminded me of okay, so what animal could be like a boar? And it reminded me of something called the stellar sea cow, and it's like a manatee, and it's now extinct because we ate them all. And they were around Greenland and like in the northern waters. So I don't know if this is just wild speculation, but like, they're maybe it's something like this. I don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean, they eat whales and stuff like that around Iceland and Greenland. Yeah. So
and apparently the stellar sea cow was delicious. And that's why they were slow moving, dumb, and delicious. And that was sort of the trifecta that led to them being hunted out of extinction once we had enough tools to do it.
Well, isn't that cool? In Valhalla, they ate manatees or something like that. No, good. Hey,
There's an image.
No, that's a cool little connection there. Speculation, obviously.
But
cool, though, and I think pretty likely, honestly.
it might be like, I don't know. It's a question, something to ask.
Considering the cultural connection, yeah, that's something pretty cool.
Yeah. Shall we move on to the next?
Let's do it.
Verse 19. Back to the poem. Battle-winning Odin feeds his tamed wolves, Geri and Freki, but for his part, weapon-loving Odin lives on wine alone.
All right, this is a good one. So Geri and Freki are wolves, and we've touched on this before, but just to re-emphasize here, the symbology of the wolf being, carnivorous ferocity or natural ferocity. That's something that you don't necessarily want to face without being prepared or without having kind of the right tools to do that. And so so that's something that Odin has, these tamed wolves essentially that are his pets, right? Geri and Freki meaning like greedy one, ravenous one. So first of all, that's just something, and I think what this gets at is the aspect of Odin having the capability for monstrosity, like in literally taming and harnessing the symbol of ferocity. This is how mankind is able to gain mastery over it, right? So wolves still exist in great numbers all over the world, but there's also dogs everywhere too, which are tamed wolves that have grown to live among humans and things like that, but many dogs are still capable of hurting or even killing people, right?
For
so
sure.
it's that taming of ferocity, that harnessing of it, and yeah. This is just saying, first of all, something that Odin is he's in tune with that idea. He is in touch with the idea of ferocity and being capable of it. So that's just. I like that it's being emphasized here that he is associated with that.
Definitely. I really like the idea too, that the idea of almost of a tamed ferocity, that it can be accessed when needed, but he's able to keep it under control. And yeah, just having two wolves it's pretty cool. Two tame wolves. The idea of drinking wine alone, I think that refers to the mead of poetry, and I can't remember the Norse word for it. But the way the reference to it is sort of, again, and we saw it a few verses back, drinking that wine of sort of the unknown of chaos, and it's just another, just him imbibing that and digesting it in a manageable quantity. And well, okay, here's an idea. He's got this chaos in a cup, but he's got his tamed wolves right by his side, so that if things get out of hand, I'm thinking like if it's not going to be a perfect analogy, mostly because I'm thinking of it as I'm talking, but if he were to maybe take in too much chaos, bite off more than he could chew, he has these two tame, ravenous, greedy wolves that are his pets, that would be there for him so that they could fight the chaos. So he's got his kind of security with him.
That's cool. I didn't even go there either. That's and you're saying you were just thinking of that on your feet, right? But that's a great idea. Like that's, something like having that with you. That ties into the idea that if you're capable of that ferocity and monstrosity, then that means that you can live in the world without fear, with the security that you can do the things that are necessary to defend yourself, to live, to defend your family, right? So I think that's... Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, because you've got what you need there that you can unleash if things get too hairy or chaotic. Yeah.
Okay. That's fantastic. And then here's something else. So it says here that he feeds his wolves. He feeds his tamed wolves, Gary and Freki, but he only lives on wine, on mead probably. But so I think that ties directly into the idea if ferocious people aren't, which men essentially all are naturally, are not harnessed, are not fed, aren't giving something to channel their aggression into, they're just going to go off. Like, I think the idea is if he doesn't feed these tamed wolves, they're going to be not tame anymore, and they're going to just go and on a rampage and destroy everything, which again, I think gets into the idea that men need an outlet in the world here. And I mean, it's just something that we're seeing these days where it's like men are being discouraged from doing traditional manly things, and that falls under toxic masculinity or the patriarchy or something like that. But there's a good reason why men are competitive, and there's, sports and the military and things like that. It's places where men can go and why women in a lot of cases just aren't interested in it either. It's like,
sure,
in a lot of ways, this is just a place for men to go and exercise their aggression, channel it into something positive. And of course, there are women who are into sports and who want to go join the military and compete and things like that. And there are men who are completely disinterested in those sorts of things. And I mean, that's fine. You do whatever you're into, but in general, I think that's a big thing that explains why sports and the military and things like that are so dominated by men, is because they need some kind of an outlet to go in there. And I think this stanza just ties into that beautifully.
Absolutely. No, I definitely agree. Yeah, that's a great connection to make. Yeah, feeding the wolves. Shall we move on?
Sure.
Okay, verse 20. Back to the poem. Thought and memory, my ravens, fly every day the whole world over. Each day I fear that thought might not return, but I fear more for memory.
So first of all, I think this stanza is a big one that's got a lot to unpack out of it. And I'll just start on the kind of the surface level here, the thought and memory. Hugin and Munin is the proper Old Norse names here, but thought and memory is what they actually translate to. So I mean, these are big ideas. I mean, this is just, the consciousness of humans, the ability to think and reason based on the world around you. I mean, that's thought, right? But memory is the ability to go look back and to understand what has happened and to bring that into the future, right? So I mean, these are huge concepts, and these are associated with Odin, which I think makes perfect sense, him being the god of wisdom, the god of knowledge and things like that. But so the passage here, and I think this is a classic one, I fear that thought might not return, but I fear more for memory. I mean, so first of all, it's saying that losing either one would be bad, but memory is maybe more at risk. So that's like maybe a two-sided thing. Like, first of all, Alzheimer's or dementia or whatnot, like those are serious conditions and very, very sad, where people who are previously completely functional just they lose their memory. They're still all there. They can still think, but they lose their memory, and I mean that's very sad. Just right there on its own, and I mean that's one side of that loss possibly there, but the other side of it too is that if you lose your memory, you lose your ability to learn from the past and to learn the lessons of the past and bring them forward.
Definitely, and building off of the idea of losing memory and thought, when someone has dementia or Alzheimer's, there's a huge sense of loss because they're still physically there, and I'd say they're able to think as much as you can think without a good memory, because if you don't have that previous experience to build off of and sort of map onto other experiences, you don't really have, like, you can't do much thinking. And it struck me that, if someone loses an arm or something, there's a sense of loss for sure, but it's like, oh, thank goodness, that was terrible, but they only lost an arm. Like, they could have died usually. But when someone loses a memory, it's like they themselves are gone. And it's a real, there's something like really powerful there, that memory is what kind of makes you. And it's those experiences that and thinking about those experiences that make you the individual that you are. And to lose that, you would actually lose yourself. And anyone who is unfortunately known anyone with Alzheimer's or dementia, like, you see them being lost. You just see this person that you knew, and as far as they knew themselves, it's all drifting away. And it's tragic and painful and serious.
Yeah, it's very sad, and I think it's exactly right the way this is phrased. I mean, I think it's saying something like you lose your ability to think. Okay, you're just gone. Like you as a person, whatever. Like, I mean, like, I think that's just. It's almost like, okay, you lose your ability to think. That's it, whatever. But losing your memory is more impactful, more meaningful on the people around you. That like there's a distinction there that I think is really important. Like losing thought is just maybe isn't so bad as losing your memory. It's implying that.
Even in the phrases we use, like when you ask someone, well, what were you thinking? And they sort of think, sometimes they even say, oh, I wasn't. And in some cases someone does something really dumb and they clearly weren't thinking about it. They just were doing it, but they survived and can look back and be like, and remember it and be like, oh, I should think next time. So there is sort of this idea that thought is super important, but without memory, it doesn't, like, the memory is really the thing that has that holds the power.
Yeah, I like that. I think you got the connotation right. I don't think I was really getting there. I think you got the connotation right as far as what thinking means in this case. I don't think he's meaning that it's going to go away permanently.
Yeah.
Now that you say it like that, but fearing more for memory if you lose your memory. And I suppose even if you lose your memory is kind of in a temporary sense, in that like you're sort of slowly losing your memory, or you're slowly losing the ability to go back to the past and utilize it from a more pragmatic sense, not so much the Alzheimer's standpoint. But
no, for sure.
I think that's just as important. And the implication there turns into like if you lose that, if you lose the ability to go back into the past and to work from it, to reason based on it, that is also very, very bad. So this is really a heavy stanza just based on that last line alone there. But that's not the only side of it that I find very interesting. The idea that ravens are the representative of thought and memory is interesting to me, because as a symbol in general, ravens the world over are essentially a negative symbol, an ill omen, not just in Norse, but in countless other cultures. They're generally associated with death, bloodshed, battle, things like that. And it's interesting to me that Odin essentially associates himself with these darker things. His thought and his memory is constituted based on these darker things. He's got his eye on not just the pleasant things in life, but in the negative things in life, the things that could be a danger, I think is what that implies. And then, well, maybe the implication for us is something like if you are able to think about the darker things in life and get a handle on them and understand them and remember the bad things that have happened, you can make the future into something better.
For sure. It makes me think of that famous Jung quote, "In the filth you'll find it." And yeah, ravens world over are bad omens, are dirty birds, death. Like they don't have a good reputation. And so yeah, I think it's an idea that you have to dive into that darkness to find things that are worthwhile. Exactly.
Like Odin embraces these ravens. He's got them as essentially, well, he's got ravens and wolves as well as pets, like these things that are hard to live with and hard to tame, and he embraces those aspects that are hard to handle and hard to deal with. I mean that's a sacrifice on its own to put yourself into that mindset, to make your thought and your memory be based on these darker things, and to have that ferocity, that capability of ferocity. I mean, it takes sacrifice to do that. Like you cannot be a ferocious person without making the sacrifice of building your body up to be able to handle the stress of life, or training in for lack of a better term, martial arts, so that you can handle yourself. Like, that's how you become a ferocious person, and that's a sacrifice in and of itself, right? So
Definitely. And then just having to know all the dark stuff. Like, who wants that? Well, Odin does, but it having to face the reality every day. Like, sometimes you just want to, zone out and not face it. But here Odin he's completely invested in it, that he's put his entire thought and memory into it. So no, it's a huge sacrifice.
Huge. Absolutely. It just goes to show Odin's character in general is something hard to emulate. I mean, like we were talking about, if these gods are characters that you emulate, examples of ways of being or ways of living a certain way, Odin's path is hard to emulate, but the implication is that he is doing what is necessary to live in the best way possible, or in the way that best gives his tribe the capability to survive even after the end of the world. And I think that's really where we're getting to. By the later episodes of the Havamal, we'll really have seen that very, very clearly. But even just here, talking about essentially his character and the way he lives, I think, these are integral parts of the way he lives. If thought and memory are his ravens, and he lives with these tamed wolves, I mean, that's integral parts of his life. And that just shows that if you make Odin the example that you model your life on, that's going to be a hard path, but it enables you to do so much.
Absolutely. Shall we move on?
Sure.
All right. And this will be the last stanza that we cover, because I don't know how long we've been going, but
it's 2.5 hours almost.
Oh, well, there we go. So
yeah.
It'll be a good one to end on. So verse 21, back to the poem. The waves thunder, and the Midgard serpent makes his home in Fenrir's sea. Dead men will find that sea passage too wide to wade. It's ominous.
Yeah. No, if I showed you my notes here for this one, I just wrote the Midgard serpent. That's enough. The Midgard serpent is this symbol of chaos, the chaos that lives. We talked about it in the Voluspa, where he lives outside, like literally in a ring outside of Midgard. He is the chaos at the edge of the world. I mean, that's a symbol the world over. On maps, they'll draw a serpent on the far end, because they have no idea what's out there, and I mean, the implication is that boats who go out that way too far, they never come back because the serpent eats them. And I mean, that's just something massive. And I mean, well, maybe this is something that ties into this poem here. I mean, dead men will find that sea passage too wide to wade. I mean, maybe that's something directly referencing, like if you go down in the sea where the serpent lives, well, you're not going to be able to get your way back, sort of thing. You're just lost.
Definitely. Well, the sea itself is incredibly dangerous. Even I remember hearing Jocko on his podcast talking about any time that the Navy SEALs did training in the water, it was treated as a live, like, not live weapons, but like it was a live scenario in that you might die there. And the possibility isn't like, there's a small chance you'll die. It's like, no, there's a decent chance that you're going to die if you don't take the proper precautions. And especially for a seafaring people as the Norse, I mean, they would know that inherently, that the sea is dangerous, that if you go out to get fish or whatever, there's a chance you're not going to come back. Now, sometimes it wouldn't be that, they'd probably fish right by their village kind of thing, but there was still, like, if a storm was coming in, they would come back in because, there was a good chance they were going to die.
And you would only learn that through,
someone dying.
Yeah, Björn went out to sea and didn't come back, sort of thing. And that happened over and over. And then you learn.
Exactly. and you would try different things to work that out. You would make sacrifices to the god of the sea, and you would build better boats and all this kind of stuff. But no, so it's a very serious reality that they're dealing with, and that's why the sea gets so much, I guess, or so many huge monsters in it. Because even calling it Fenrir Sea, I mean, Fenrir, well, first of all, the name Fenrir is like Fen Dweller, which is not the most like awe-inspiring name for the wolf that is going to like eat the sky and the ground in one bite. But it is kind of like a marshy land. And if you were to walk through there, there's again a good chance, like if you're to fall, you're going to go into the water and you might not come out.
Another Tolkien reference we can point to, like the dead marshes.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember. Yeah, exactly.
In both his books, actually, it's in The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. I think something like that.
For sure.
Yeah, so it's important.
And look at all the people we're taking out of bogs right now, and then and how well preserved they are, and how violently they met. A lot of them met their ends very violently. Like there's something going on there.
Yeah, the bog people. I remember actually that was an exhibit at the local museum here when I was maybe 11 or 12 or something like that, and I just thought that was like when I went for a school trip, and it was just some of the most awe-inspiring things. I had no idea that this would end up being related to these sorts of stories, to the Norse eventually. I had no idea that that's who it was, but it was just some of the most interesting things, and they are examples of the archaeological history, some of the best examples of the archaeological history of North Central Europe. And it's yeah, they died there, and they lived there, and when we've got evidence of that, and yeah, like there's definitely something to that.
Makes me think that I wonder if there's something with fens in general. Maybe that's where it was known that murderers drop bodies there, or something like that, or I don't know, just something bad that they would give the wolf the name that he lives in the fens. Like, so something else to check out. After, like, let us know in the comments for sure, or and I know that's another thing I'll be checking out.
But just to go back though, Frigg's Hall is Fensor.
Oh yeah.
So, I mean, that just complicates things, right? I mean, maybe that's an example of a kind of area where you're living one foot in the unknown. Maybe.
That might be it. Something to think about for sure. This is a good one, yeah.
That's a thinker.
Definitely. So, it talks about the Midgard serpent. In other translations, they also have something called the slaughter horse, which is like, there's a band name if I ever heard one.
Yes.
And I'm assuming that is a kenning for the Midgard serpent, but I could be wrong unless there's other sea creatures that it could be.
Sure. Yeah, that would make sense though. Yeah. Slaughter horse.
Slaughter horse, man. They have the best names for stuff. Like, they must have like sat up and thought of these names around a campfire drinking mead and just be like, hey, you know what that is? It's a slaughter horse.
Absolutely. Of course, that's how that would come about too. I mean, if you've ever had a good night where you got a good buzz going, I mean, not to advocate that because the Havamal says don't drink too much.
Exactly.
Go watch episode 4, guys. But that's the perfect time to be inspired by that sort of thing. And maybe that's why Odin gets all his inspiration from the mead of poetry, just to tie this all back in. That's really cool. And it's appropriate to end this evening on the Midgard serpent. He's if we remember from the Voluspa, I mean not the Midgard serpent, but another symbol of chaos, Nidhogg, the dragon. I mean, he's ever present in the world, and this is just a reminder that the Midgard serpent is ever present in the world, and it's just something good to remember. And maybe we'll leave you with that.
Yeah. I'll leave one other thing about Midgard serpent, actually. And I just remember this. So, because life evolved in the oceans first, right? Yeah. There are sea serpents. There are snakes that live in the ocean. They are many times more poisonous than land snakes because they've been around that much longer and haven't really needed to evolve and had to exist with things that were much like scarier than what's around now. And I think too that, the Midgard serpent is venomous. We know that because it, spoiler alert, kills Thor. So, like, this is something that they know, is that there are poisonous snakes in the ocean that, like, really kill you. Like, not, like, worse than the land ones that...
Yeah, they don't just mostly kill you.
No, they just... It's like you're dead. You're not getting out of the water, yeah.
Wow.
And it's, I think, mercifully swift, but... Yeah,
yeah, good detail to emphasize there.
Yeah. No, I just remembered that, but yeah, so...
The scope and scale of what the Midgard serpent actually represents, maybe that's something that references,
absolutely.
Right? And
so,
with that,
I think we'll close the book on another episode. Thank you for listening, and of course, thanks to Jackson Crawford and Hackett Publishing for letting us use this wonderful translation of the Poetic Edda. As you can tell, it's great. It's very readable and really gets you to understand what's going on. Yeah, I love it.
Definitely, and if you'd like to follow along, definitely check it out, pick it up. It's on Amazon. The link is below. So yeah, definitely check it out. Great, worth reading and rereading. So
for sure,
great translation. And I think we'll probably mention here that we're on all of the social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, at Northern Myths for Twitter and / Northern Myths for Facebook. So,
and Instagram is Northern Myths Podcast.
Yeah, so you can find us on there. Please reach out. We would love to connect and talk more about this.
Absolutely.
As you've heard here, please leave comments on the YouTube video or find us on Facebook or Twitter and tell us what you think.
Yeah, subscribe, review, comment. Like, yeah, we talk with everyone who comments. So, and we can still do that because we're still, smallish.
Absolutely. So, yeah. I mean, for as long as that lasts, we would love to hear from you. So,
I mean, you can tell we love this stuff and nerd out for it. So we're happy to talk about it with anyone.
Exactly. And just maybe to let people know on the YouTube channel, we are doing something new here lately. We got some great feedback when we posted a short clip of an episode as a teaser, and we're starting to post more clips of episodes because I mean the way this all is organized, really it presents itself really well for little clips that are all related to just kind of one topic. And we're going to start a series. I think by the time this episode is out, we will have started a series on the Havamal where we're going to just release a clip of the Havamal once a week, and we're going to release other clips of our episodes here. So if you want to check us out, check out the YouTube channel for those of you who are mostly just on the podcast, but that's another reason to just to take a look at our YouTube channel, because we got some we think that there's some cool things that we're coming out with it there. So
for sure. I think with that, we haven't thanked Jordan Peterson yet, and we always have to, because we wouldn't be doing this without his biblical lectures and his university courses on YouTube. This whole thing is inspired by that, so thanks to him.
Thanks, Jordan Peterson. Yeah,
and I think we've got links to his YouTube page on our podcast page and YouTube channel.
Yeah, we include the links there because again he's so integral to what we're talking about. You can find his YouTube channel, which we recommend really highly, plus his list of recommended books, which includes some really, really cool things, and a lot of the books that we're referencing come from his recommended reading list,
including the Young book that I was reading and used today. So yeah, and with that, I think that's about it. So we here at Northern Myths Podcast, we like to always remind you to find out the myth that you're living. And with that, I think we'll say goodbye.